Hey guys, welcome back to Arry The Stag. TR Tony here. Just thought I'd do a quick end of year review on all the highlights and some of the pitfalls that we've had during 2023. Let's go over and have a look. Okay, so our story started off in January with the tale of the Triumph Stag fuel tank. We all know the vagaries of this particular type of tank in that it tends to rust in the underside, and we did a film all about that and where to look for those rusticles, which tend to exist in the base of the tank at the front behind the bulkhead where you can't see in the boot. So first chance you get is really just to smell petrol in the boot, and that's an indicator that something might be leaking a bit. It's always worth having a look at that and seeing what you can do to either rectify it or ideally change over the tank. Then in February, you may remember we actually had the Arry The Saloon, 2500 Saloons gearbox come back from Andy in Wales. He'd completely gone through the old box, refurbished it, refettled it, so it was almost a brand new, well, pretty much a brand new box to go back in the car. That alongside came the 6-cylinder 2.5 engine that Saunders in Southampton had refettled for us, along with the head and rocker covers as well as rockers. So all good and looking really resplendent and ready to go back into Eddie. It was going to be a few weeks before we got to that job, but suffice to say they'd done a decent job and we had at last a full-blown engine to go back into the car. Now in March, Downpike, Duke and I decided we'd go down to Allen's in the Red Barrow, the UES 591S Triumph Stag, because we were tired and sick and tired of all the rust that was popping out in all sorts of funny places, having had the car for 3 to 4 years. So off it went down to Allen's to commence a bit of a complete, what ended up being a respray of the entire car. All the striations that had formed because of bad paintwork before were in evidence and it needed addressing. Into April then, and for some reason TR Tony decided to experiment with Coca-Cola and the Triumph Stag wheel nuts to see if he could remove some of the rust from those said wheel nuts. And I think largely it was successful, though quite what it proved, I'm not quite sure, but it was one of those things we thought we'd do for a laugh and a bit of an old wives' tale, but it seemed to work, so highly recommended. And I should say here that any cola, not necessarily Coca-Cola, would do the job, I'm sure, just as well. Arry the Stag. Now in May, it saw us back down at Allen's to review the Red Barrow and the progress that he'd made with the car. As I mentioned earlier, there was a whole heap of tin of worms, I think, that were opened up when he started to go through the car. Principally, the paint that had been applied before was quite soft. He'd never seen such crummy paint on there before. It was actually going pink and blistering in the rain. So he got stuck in and obviously inevitably found a whole heap of rust and all sorts of little pockets of bubbles, which he, being a bit of a perfectionist himself, decided he wasn't going to just leave and tried to address. So from a quick blow over that we had thought, he actually spent a lot of time going through the entire car, including trying to get the bonnet to align properly, because again there'd been about an inch difference between bonnet and top of the wing. Again, in the past I think someone had replaced the wing, so he went through the entire car and it suddenly became a much bigger job than he or I had anticipated. But I'm very grateful that he took the time, because I think you'll see a bit later just how well worthwhile the whole process was. Now, middle of the year, we took our time to look at how you interpret the commission plate that is appended to the B-post on the near side in UK Stags, how the numbers correlate to production, and also the paint and trim code interpretation. There's so many different varieties of different shades of paint and trim, and that with the knowledge that you can get from the owner's handbook, actually you can remove a lot of myths with what the car was originally born with in terms of its manufactured paint and trim colours. Very useful given some of these cars are over 50 years old. We circled back to Allen just to see how progress was being made with the Triumph Stag, and as you can see here in the sunshine, it didn't get any worse than this. So this was its worst condition it got into. As you can see, he had been entirely through the car. This was the point before he started getting into paint and getting it back looking resplendent as it eventually did. Now, with the Red Barrow away at Allen's for full paint and respray, we decided we'd turn our attention to Arry The S. It had been a number of months since we had the engine and gearbox back in complete format, ready to go in the car, and it was stashed in our garage on a pallet for some months. We'd actually had to rebuild the front of it with timing chains and sprockets and so on, but it was ready to go in. The engine bay had been prepared, and today was the day that we were going to put it back into the car and try and get it reconnected and start the process of rebuild at last to get the car back on the road. And with a sneak preview of progress back from Alan with the car at least in some paint, we were very excited about the way forward, all to be revealed very soon. Meanwhile, we were making steady progress with Arry The S with the assistance of Will, my neighbour across the road, who's been a great guy, lending us the engine lift, and then Harry helping us out with getting the head on and sorting out the car. It was beginning to come together, although a bit of a tricky job to get it actually on the engine mounts in the bay, but we did discover how to do it in the end. And then finally, after many months at Allen's, the Red Barrow UES 591S returned to home, and I think you'll agree he'd done a pretty spectacular job. If you'd seen the paint work before he'd got into it, you'd have been absolutely shocked. So he had to pretty much take it down to the bare shell and start all over again. But we're very, very pleased. It was highly polished. We managed to get an aftermarket stripe from James Paddock, which was really good. And you've got to be a bit careful because some are quite thin. This was actually the standard Triumph recommended width, which took a bit of an art form to get onto the car. Instantly all the oil on the drive is from another car. We've since cleaned the drive off, but even down to the rear lights, Alan had actually polished them up because they were a bit frosted and a bit glazed beforehand. But I think you can agree with the hardtop on, which soon came off obviously because it was summertime. We had a few days out in open top motoring. Very, very impressed with what he'd done. So well done, Alan. Top bloke, and highly recommended. Headlong then into late summer stroke early autumn, and we were now putting the head on the engine, which was talking down very nicely. Harry had his own little technique for trying to make sure that we did it in the right sequence and also didn't miss any of the nuts out. During September, the weather was absolutely stunning here in the UK, and so it made sense to go along to the Christchurch Cars on the Prom event, which was extremely well attended. I must say it felt like summer days or back again, and well turned out. Loads of people went, and some fantastic examples of Stags and also many other cars as well. It really was a great turnout, and thanks to the guys who organised it, because it really did go down extremely well. Now, a real low during the year, as many of you know, is that sadly Downpipe Duke passed away in October. He was a wonderful dog, and we'll always love him to bits. He was absolutely fantastic and a great fan of Arry The Stag, as you all know. God bless you, Downpipe Duke. Into November then, and we had some fantastic news that Alan had managed to finalise the engine for us. We had got to a certain point and decided, because the weather was closing in, actually he'd be a great guy to finish the car for us, which he duly did. And this was our inaugural first ever test drive post Scotland, where the car had broken down on the way back from Scotland, as you remember. And it was an absolute joy to get back in the car and get Arry The S back on the road again. Happy days indeed. During December, it was a really great time to reflect on the year that has been, and we uncovered a whole catalogue of previous records that previous owners had had for Arry The S, and with these we shared with you alongside a couple of the brochures and some other adverts that we'd found from around about the time. One of the surprises was that actually Eddie DS EOD 195 had a previous number, PNR 83R, as you can see there. And suffice to say, we were very chuffed to see the provenance of the car, and it's obviously had a lot of money, a lot of love thrown at it over the time, and I think we've just continued that on and hopefully can pass that on to the new owner in due course once we've had a little bit of fun with it. All right, guys, well, it's been a really busy year at Arry The Stag, hasn't it? And loads more to come, I'm sure, next year. If you like this video, want to see some more from Arry The Stag, click here or here and check it out. All the best, Happy New Year, and see you online on Arry The Stag very soon.